Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest this week is producer, entrepreneur, and educator David Franz. First of all, sad to say that an audio giant has passed. Yeah, Rupert Neve has passed away at age 94 due to non-COVID pneumonia and heart failure. 94 is a good long life, and in that life, Rupert really made the best of it and made the best of it for us as well. Just some facts about Rupert that you might not know. First of all, even though he was born in the United Kingdom, he grew up in Argentina and designed his first audio amplifiers at age 13. His first company actually made hi-fi speakers. It was called CQ Audio. Never saw those, actually. He designed his first mixing console in 1961, and that's also the year that his company, Rupert Neve, started. In 1964, he built his first transistor console. Up until then, most consoles were tube, and he managed to actually make transistors, which they didn't sound too good at the time, but he made them sound not only good, but legendary. Interestingly enough, the original Neve factory buildings in Melbourne were torn down and replaced by a housing development. They're now called Rupert Neve Close. In 1973, Rupert sold his original Neve, and he stayed on for a couple more years, leaving in 1975. Then he started a company that he had until the end of his life, ARN Consultants, which also helped start Focusrite, which was his next big console venture, and that folded in 1989. Along the way, he consulted for companies like AMEC, Taylor Guitars, Legendary Audio, and SC Electronics. Rupert moved to Texas in 1994, and he and his wife became U.S. citizens in 2002. In 2005, he established Rupert Neve Designs, the company that still survives and will survive since he passed down all of his designs as well as his design sensibilities. Rupert has been widely cited during his life. He won a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1997, an AES Fellowship Award in 2006, 16 Tech Awards, and was named Studio Sound's Audio Person of the Century in 1999. More than anything, though, he established the bar for audio quality that many are still trying to reach. He will be missed. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOwsinski.com. Don't forget about my music mixing primer and 101 mixing tricks programs that will help take your mixes to the next level. Go to BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com to learn more. Now, we all know about radio's fading influence, but surprisingly enough, it still accounts for 39% of audio consumption compared to 18% of streaming. However, the latest Music Watch report has found that those numbers are actually swapped when it comes to just music consumption. So in other words, about 38% of our music consumption comes from streaming and about 15% from the radio. Now, this is actually a big deal from the standpoint that record labels are changing substantially in how they look at radio. It's a long time coming, but it's finally happening. Record labels are decreasing or eliminating their radio promotion teams. The reason why is radio used to be the head of the consumption curve. In other words, that's how you discovered new artists and new songs. Now it's at the end of the consumption curve. In fact, what's happening is you discover your music by streaming, and radio helps to elongate or extend the life of that song. So everything has changed, and it's accelerated a lot, mostly because of COVID. Now, the thing is, radio is passive listening. It's perfect for car commuting. But now that many of us don't commute any longer, and no one knows if that's ever going to come back to the way it was, well, it turns out that radio just has less and less influence. Superstars only get about half the radio audience as they did before. And not only that, there are fewer radio spots than ever. Top 40 radio only plays 18 songs in rotation. So internally for record labels, promo departments used to have all the power because it was the promo department that actually made a hit a hit. No longer. Promo departments now have less and less power and, like I said before, are even being disbanded. So, life has changed a lot when it comes to radio consumption, and that's made record label life way different as well. My guest this week is producer, multi-instrumentalist, and educator David Franz, who wrote the very first book on Pro Tools, as well as creating online courses for both Berklee Online and lynda.com. Besides running his label Underground Sun and ED artist development and event production company Underground Sol, David is also the content manager for lynda.com and LinkedIn Learning, where he works with creative professionals to create courses, including yours truly, on the platform. During the interview, we spoke about writing the first book on Pro Tools, doing a deep analysis of Miles Davis, his Airstream trailer-based studio, the technique of melding electronic and live musicians together, recording an album remotely, and much more. I spoke with David via Zoom from his studio in Ojai, California. Let's go back to when you got started in music. You were a drummer first, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had a lot of musical instruments in the house. My mom played piano, my dad played guitar. So those were always around, and there's pictures of me playing. And I took piano lessons when I was young and some guitar lessons here and there and bass lessons. But there was age 8, was it 11 or 12? I said, I need to learn an instrument. And this guy down the street was a really good drummer. And I'm like, I want to do that. And then soon after I found Neil Peart and I was like, oh boy, this is it.
Is that your favorite instrument?
No, not anymore. Guitar, because I love writing songs is my biggest passion. So writing on the drums is not exactly the, sometimes, you get a beat and you're like, okay, that starts things off. But no, guitar, that's where I'm at right now. I mean, guitar and bass, I love playing keys, but the guitar is the first thing I'll grab.
It's funny. I did some things with Terry Bozzio a few years ago, and he had his huge drum kit. I don't know, 40-some drums that he had, but he had a bunch of them that were tuned. He could actually play a melody because they're all tuned to notes, and, then he was triggering a synth. So I guess you could write on drums, more than just a beat.
When you have a kit like that, yeah. I have a friend, Simon Phillips lives up here in Ojai, and so we hang out from time to time. And his kit is one of those ginormous ones as well, and they're all perfectly tuned. And so I don't know how he writes his songs, but I'm sure he gets a lot of inspiration from that too.
Yeah, he used to have a studio down here. It was right next door to a former partner of mine at California Vintage Guitars.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had it for a while. And Toto did a bunch of their records there, as a matter of fact. It's just a small place. You'd never know it was there.
Well, and then he brought it up to Ojai, and then Ojai burned it down. So, but he's rebuilt. And so I think he's actually moving into his new spot soon. So that's exciting.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, let's jump ahead. So you go to Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
But you don't study music.
I took as many courses as I could, but my parents, okay, so God bless them. Like, they didn't know that I could be a musician or some kind of music related. I couldn't have a career in music. They're like, they knew how much I was into it in high school, but they said, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer, be whatever, make a career, something you can make money at. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I get to Virginia Tech and I'm going to be an engineer, apparently taking as many courses as I can in music. There wasn't that much of a music program there, but I took everything I could. MIDI programming. I took guitar lessons from a ridiculous jazz sax player there, Chip McNeil, and then played in every single band I could play in. I was playing in 3 or 4 bands at a time. So it was there. It just didn't know where to go. until midway through my master's degree when I started getting interviews, and I would go and see what the jobs were really like. And I'm like, this is horrible. I do not want to do this at all. So came up with an idea for a master's thesis that involved music. And then that was just my exit. I was like, I got to get out of here.
I had the same experience. I'm trained as an electronic engineer, and I had one job doing it, and it lasted for exactly 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And what it was so bizarre because I was in a room that was filled floor to ceiling with schematics on every wall. And I would get stuff in. I had to troubleshoot it, but theoretically, it was telecommunications back before, the internet or anything. And all these fancy phones, actually. So it'd come in with the tag on, this is wrong or whatever. And I'd have to look at the schematic and say, oh, well, it must be Q17. I never knew if I was right or wrong.
Oh my God. That sounds like you made the right choice.
Oh God, yeah. Well, this was kind of in between, when I was out of one band looking for something else or one of those things with 6 weeks. Your thesis, tell me about that, because that sounds really interesting.
So, it's called Mathematically Modeling Jazz Improvisation with Markov Chains. Something like that. It has all those words in it. I don't remember exactly the title, but so my master's degree was about industrial and systems engineering, and one of the subtopics of that was optimization. In that area of focus, there's a thing called Markov chains, which is basically statistical analysis of predicting what can happen next, probability-wise. And so I looked at these things and I was like, this is a great way to potentially predict in a jazz solo where an artist might pick their next note. If they're playing, a C on an A minor chord, where could they go next? And it's a probability matrix. So there's 12 potential tones, but if you stay in key, then it brings it down to less, depending on what the key is. So I went through and found John Coltrane on Giant Steps, obviously an amazing song. And what was really cool about that song is that it's very patternistic, and also he played basically eighth notes almost all the way through all of his things. So that took rhythm out of the factor, so all I needed to really do was look at the eighth notes, one to the next. And so I could look at every single chord and see what notes he would play on top of those chords. Fortunately, someone amazing out there had transcribed all of his recordings from every recorded version that he's ever done of that song. And so I got all those transcripts and, sat down often at a bar while I was having a drink and plotted out each note from that, and then inputted that ultimately into a spreadsheet, and then did the mathematics of it, and then created these giant probability matrices that could tell, when he played this chord, what note he would go to next and next and next, and had probabilities for all of those different things. And so from that, you could tell where certain areas where he was more creative or not, where like some chord progressions he would play, 50% of the time he would play this exact pattern. And then other times he would play, he went out a lot more. He tried a bunch of different stuff. And from that, I started creating, thinking about intelligence and creativity, and how creativity could potentially be, in this one particular case, sort of, quantified, which is kind of crazy to think about. So it led me into a lot of different directions. So I got to have the engineering, the optimization kind of stuff, and then the music. and then the creativity, the psychology kind of intelligence tests and stuff like that I got into with it. So it tied together a lot of really cool topics for me.
What did you learn from that? Was there one thing that kind of struck you?
Well, the bigger picture thing was that I could have taken that data, and then clearly with technology now, back then it was kind of pushing the envelope, but you could create solos that he didn't play, but were completely in his style. I kind of wish I could use that data. I probably still could at some point, and there's probably a computer program that could handle that super easy right now. But the bigger things were sort of the creativity, and like looking into like where Coltrane got more creative and where he felt maybe tied in a little bit more in certain parts of the song. That was pretty interesting to me.
Well, yeah, Giant Steps is one of those that to many musicians so far out there and so beyond them that they can't get their arms around it. So it's different for you since you're pretty intimate with it, that you could actually see those things that most people can't.
Well, the numbers don't lie, so you can look at it. I could say, oh, during these two chords, the probability of him playing something the same was a lot less than on some of these other ones where he was sort of boxed in maybe by the chord progression, or he just didn't have as big of a vocabulary for that change or something like that, because so much of what he did with that song was he just practiced these, really fast, patterns. And so was able to, piece them all together in these certain ways that just sounds incredible.
Yeah, that's the one thing I remember from my time at Berklee, and it's probably the same. I want to get to that with you, actually, but it's probably the same, where when you went by the practice rooms and you listened to the sax players, they were all basically doing the same thing. It was these patterns and how fast could you get?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a rite of passage, in a way, to kind of get to that level where you can pull it off.
Yeah. Okay, so from there you went to Berklee.
Yes.
What did you study?
Ultimately, music production and engineering. It took me a minute to kind of figure that out, but I got there. I thought I was going to be a songwriting major, and because that's what I absolutely love to do. But then I kind of realized that, well, coming out of Berklee with a songwriting degree doesn't really maybe get you anywhere. But if you're going to, at least for me, I was going to be songwriting no matter what. So I might as well learn a skill that goes along with it. And so I progressed from songwriting to, they had a degree at some point called contemporary writing and production, which is sort of the middle ground. I landed there for a minute and then ultimately got into MP&E. And I'm so happy I landed there. Oh man. What a great major to have there.
I helped start that program.
Well, your influence goes way deeper than you know, my friend.
Well,
especially with me.
Believe me, when we started it was nothing like it ended up to be. It was kind of the gleam in everybody's eye to kind of make it. And, there wasn't much at first, and especially as compared to the way it is now.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it was difficult to teach at the time because no one knew how to do it. I mean, there was no manual on how to do a lot of that stuff. So it was difficult figuring things out, especially figuring, exercises out for people. I think I failed miserably at it, to be honest with you, but it laid the groundwork for later.
Well, and is that why you ultimately started writing some books? Because nobody's done this.
No. The reason for me is I was a good recording engineer, but I was a mediocre at best mixer. But I knew all the great mixers. So I went to them all and I asked them how they did it. And they told me, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm like this, I bet there's a lot of other people that want to know this. And that resulted in the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. So, and most of my books are like that, where I want to learn something, so I go and I ask people that are a whole lot smarter than I am. It's been working so far.
Well, I can tell you that you were a huge influence on me while I was at school, and then particularly when I wrote my first book and all of the subsequent ones. I mean, you inspired so much of that and were such a guide. We didn't even know each other then,
No.
but I was tapping into your energy a lot during that time period.
Well, it's nice to hear. Tell me about the first book, the Pro Tools book, right?
Yeah, I was at Berklee as a student and was basically interning or work studying at Berklee Press, which had just started back up. I was, employee number 4 or something like that. And we were seeing all these books coming through, and, I was helping photocopying these. And I'm a master's degree person in there photocopying for hours and hours and hours, making like $3 an hour or whatever it was. I'm like, my time could maybe be used a little better. So I ended up, and at Berklee, at the time, we had one Pro Tools system that was on a floating desk that would go from studio to studio. Nobody really knew how to use it. And right at that same time, Pro Tools LE was about to come out. And I read the first review about it in a magazine. I think it was like 6 months out. And I went to Berklee Press. I'm like, somebody has to do a book on this. Like, this is going to be huge. Pro Tools coming to the home studio. We got to do it. And I'm like, I'll help, maybe I'll help one of the professors or something like that. And they're like, at that moment, for some reason, they were upset with the professors. They're just like, why don't you just do it yourself? And I'm like, okay, I've written a thesis, but I haven't really written a book before. So, but anyway, I just dove right in. And it was during my senior year of Berklee, which was insanity. So, I had to keep 2 jobs going. I was playing in 2 bands. I was trying to have a girlfriend, going to school full time, and writing a book, which I didn't know how to do, using a software that I barely knew how to use. So it was a hard year. But I had you in my corner, Bobby Owsinski.
Well, I'm curious. How did I influence you on that?
I mean, I didn't know how to structure a book. I didn't know how the tone should be. So I would look at what you did and, a few other references, but I'm like, how do you talk about this stuff? And so fortunately I had help. I was with a publishing company already, Berklee Press, and I had Paul Feckler, who was the DigiDesign marketing manager at the time. So he was reading what I was writing. And, I had a lot of help from my advisors. My faculty people were giving a lot of assistance. And I was kind of like melding almost like the Pro Tools manual and all the stuff that I was learning at Berklee and sort of putting them together and then looking at how you kind of structured stuff and kind of melded that all together.
My experience with Berklee Press was pretty negative, actually. I guess you experienced it in another reincarnation. But for me, it was they came to us, me and a couple other guys that were teaching music production. They said, people are having trouble getting started in the studio. Can you write a manual? And I sat down and I wrote the whole thing. And I gave it to one of the other teachers who then rewrote it and rewrote it so poorly. And I didn't see it. I didn't get a chance to see it. So when the book finally came out, it was just horrific. And I don't remember anything other than just being horrified when I saw it. And that was kind of it. I didn't think anything, until now, actually, I didn't think about it. But
sorry to bring up a bad memory.
The other thing I remember is how bad the deal was.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a low percentage. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's such a low percentage that I looked at it and I thought, is this actually worth it?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to that. I don't know what your terms were. I know what mine were, and I didn't know any better. So I just did it, and it was trial by fire. And I almost like I didn't sleep for a year. So when I came out of that experience, I had lost it. Like I had lost my mind basically. So
Okay, so you had the same experience that most first-time writers have, including me, where you finish the book and you think, oh, I'm never going to do that again.
right. Well, it's funny. I've been listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast a lot lately too, and he talks a lot and has a lot of writers on there, and they talk about their writing process a lot. And it's so nice to, however many years later, to hear people's struggles and how hard it is to write a book. It is ridiculously hard to write a book, even if it's just your full-time job. So I look at you and I'm like, you are so prolific. For me to get mine out, I got it out in a year while I was doing all that other stuff, which is, looking back, is pretty impressive. But I would never want to do that again. Like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That was horrible.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at it now because I know the process. I've done it so many times.
You just go on a cruise, right? You're just like, oh yeah.
Well, yeah, except for the one I did now. And that was actually one of the harder ones, I have to say. It's the music mixing workbook, and it's actually a series of exercises. If you're brand new to mixing, it's for students, in schools. So there's 175 exercises. So I wrote the whole book without doing any exercises. I did it conceptually, and that was easy. And then I thought, I better go through myself and actually do these exercises. And I wound up rewriting everything. And it was difficult to get it to the point where, well, this makes a difference when you actually do this operation and you can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But, so conceptual works one way, but actually, physically doing it is separate. So it was hard.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to check it out. I was reading about it today. It just came out, right? It's like fresh.
It just came out yesterday, and It's number one today in 3 categories.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So enough about me. How did you get out to California?
So I'd been in Boston after Berklee and had a production company, Underground Sun, was born in Boston. And been working with a bunch of bands and working on my sound, like how I was doing my stuff. And I just got to a level where I was like, there were 2 things. I got to a level with my production where I was like, okay, I'm good enough, I think, to be in California and be in Los Angeles and sort of like compete. Because I didn't feel like I was there when I got out of Berklee at all, even though, I was going to move out there, but 9/11 happened, and that's a whole other crazy story. So I finally got to a level of where felt my quality was good enough. And then once I started thinking about it more, I realized that way more of my friends were out there anyway. And why wouldn't I just go out and be closer to all my contacts and live in a sunny place? I'd been in Boston for like 11 years and was depressed for 9 months out of each year. So,
especially up there.
Yeah.
It's cold, the wind coming off the Charles.
So when I decided to make the trip, or decided to make the move, I did one last trip out here, and it was like California gave me this big giant hug. I got off the airplane, and as soon as I walked up to the baggage thing, my bag came right up with me. I just grabbed it. I didn't even lose stride. Walked right out to the rental bus thing. It pulled right up as I walked up. Walked right in. I get to the rental car place. They're like, sorry, Mr. Franz, we don't have your car, but we're going to upgrade you to this nice, convertible. I'm like, okay. And then I was like off to a meeting with an awesome producer, and it went super well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my place. It's welcoming me. So that was joyous. And then finding a really cool spot in Venice was awesome. So yeah, it all came together.
Yeah, Venice was the place for a while. And I don't think it is so much now, but there was a lot going on down there music-wise for many years.
Yeah, it's unfortunate where it is right now. I think I got it in its peak, sort of the rise, and then it's as it started dipping is when I fortunately got out to Ojai.
Why did it dip, do you think?
Snapchat. Snap came in and started buying up a bunch of stuff. And there's I guess there's some legal stuff where they had a ghost corporation that covered it all up and bought all kinds of stuff. And I mean, other tech stuff, but it kind of turned from more artsy to more tech bro kind of vibes. And it was always with the art side of it. There were a lot of actors. There were a lot of musicians, artists of all varieties down there. But then as tech started coming in, the rents just went through the roof. Housing costs were insane. And the crime didn't necessarily go away. It just got a little weirder. So there was always like, Venice was like art and crime getting along together.
Yeah, right.
But it just, and then, like certain things like Snap bought the Freak Show thing that's down on the boardwalk. Yeah. They bought it, closed it down, and didn't put anything in there. And so it just took away so much of the character. So anyway, I don't know. I'm a little bitter about it, and now the homeless situation down there is pretty gnarly. So that's unfortunate for everybody. And I'm sure the pandemic has a lot to do with that, but.
Well, you're in a good part of the world now. Ojai, California is a primo spot for those who know of it.
It's a magical little town, I gotta say. Pretty lucky. I miss LA, though. I love coming down there. So, and it's a super easy drive just to get down, but this place has some special juju.
I want to talk more about production with you because you said that you kind of found your technique in Boston. And what I've always found about you have a nice balance between electronic and live instruments. And that's kind of rare because it usually goes one way or the other. But you're kind of in the middle.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the music that I like. I ride the line between wanting the rawest blues, roughest performance, along with EDM that is just, straight 4 on the floor. So I want somehow to meld that together. The soul of the human expression with the solid, shake your booty.
That's a hard line. It is from the standpoint that you run the risk of alienating one audience or the other. And if you alienate both, that's a big problem. But there's also the chance that you can meld both together.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times a lot of my productions do have both in them. So it'll be a live drummer and, loops. It'll be synth stuff that's, to the grid along with guitars that are raw. So it does kind of pull all that together. And hopefully it works, Certainly it takes a lot of working on the timing and making sure the feel is solid.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always a problem that I think everybody faces when you kind of meld the two together, because it's easy to get stuff on the grid, obviously, when you're doing electronic, but then you almost feel like you have to put the live stuff on the grid as well, mm-hmm. or at least get it close. So how do you do that? Well,
part of it, I think, stemmed from when I was originally playing, like one of my bands in Boston, we would play along to Pro Tools. I was the drummer. I controlled Pro Tools, but so we would have it aligned to the grid, but I could go, speed up or slow down, but still stay on the click. And I think that drummer mentality sort of helps me in all the production that I do, whether it's guitars or bass or whatever. And kind of like, if it, to me, I kind of like can see a bass line, even if the drums are right on the grid, if the bass sits back a little bit, or if the guitar is, back and forth a little bit, or something like that, that kind of gives it the human element. As long as it doesn't get too whacked out, it kind of lets it sit in a different place, or a good place, hopefully.
I've always found that if you get that stuff close to the grid, but not exactly on, and that seems to be kind of a sweet spot, except, there are things, accents and starts and stops, and things like that, that behooves you to put those on the grid, but everything else can breathe pretty well.
Yeah. And, like there'll be, yeah, I mean, so you might like take, let's say, a verse loop or something like that, or something, I'm thinking of like some drums that I've done recently where it's like I'll kind of put them to the grid, but it won't be loops. It'll be full performances. So there's a lot of variation. So that adds to it, even if it's timed well, having velocities that are different because it's a real human playing. And then, maybe there's accents, or like the downbeat on a big fill happens a little early, like a normal human would do. Leave that in and make sure that everybody is kind of aligned with that, or something like that. So little tricks like that, I guess.
You talked about recording. Tell me about your Airstream studio.
The Airstream. Yes. Yeah. So a couple years ago, I bought this, basically it's the longest Airstream that they make. It's an 87, 3-axle Airstream. And we decided to basically turn the front end into a music studio. It's still fully functioning as I've taken it across the country and back, and you can live out of it. It's big enough. It's super comfortable. It's really, really fun. But I got Hanson Sue, who from Delta H Designs, to come in and spec out the front end and turn a metal tube into an acoustically treated, really good sounding room, basically, where I can record vocals. And so I'll send you, if you go onto undergroundsun.com, you can see pictures of it. There's the outside and then the inside. And so basically the front end has wooden panels that have the DHDI, design stuff on them, the way that they manufacture their panels, that they usually put in as, I think it's like a foot square inside of, often inside of fabric. So, but these are just exposed. And so they curve around I think they're 4-inch blocks, basically, and they curve around. And then we have panels that cover the windows. And then doors, actually these, I forget what he calls them, but they're basically these panels that come down as doors. So it's all treated. And then we have a couch that's in there that, obviously sucks up some of the sound too, but it actually sounds really awesome.
I didn't know much about Airstreams until recently. When I started to do some research, I found that people are so passionate about their Airstreams. It's incredible.
There's a giant community out there, for all kinds of stuff. You want to learn how to fix something. You want to know the best place to get hookups so you can get your water and electricity. If you want to figure out where the best places are to go out on BLM land where you can be totally off the grid, there's all that information out there.
Are there other studios?
Only a few that I've seen, and most of them are parked. I don't know of any other ones that are mobile like mine. Ultimately, when we get back, pandemic over, I would love to be able to, and this was the goal, was to be able to go anywhere to do any kind of recording. And, even the acoustics of it enable me to mix actually really well and master a little in there. So basically I can do, obviously you can't have like a full band, but you could get a couple of players in there for sure if you needed to.
Well, let's get to Underground Sun. So you've had that label for a long time. and it's a specialty label because it's following your production senses. Tell me about the evolution of it.
Sure. I mean, in Boston, it started just as a sort of a production house, I guess. And I would work with bands or various artists around Boston. You know, I didn't really know what a label was, to be honest. And then it sort of developed into, when I got to Boston, or when I got to Los Angeles, Venice, I turned it into what I called an artist development company, where I would help artists not only just write songs and produce them, but also to do crowdfunding, music videos, marketing, all the stuff to try to help launch their careers. And then ultimately, kind of when I got to almost Ojai, basically was when I sort of turned it into an indie label, which, you know, what's an artist development company? What's an indie label? They're pretty similar, but it just seemed to, we'd kind of taken some steps up. And so it seemed right to call it an indie label. And now we've been, you know, branching out from the music side of things into live streaming and doing a lot more in the video space. So over this past year, we started doing live streaming from the Airstream, where we'd put on like these hour-long specials where we'd feature a lot of Underground Sun talent, some other talent, local talent from Ojai, because we couldn't go further, you know. But ultimately, and then we did some interviews, you know, like long, you know, over video chat and everything like that too. Ultimately, getting to a point where we were doing these longer form pieces about various artists, and culminating in the last kind of things that we did was these artist spotlights and the Artist Mind, where we kind of did like a full-on 22-minute feature about music creation and creativity in general, with a full interview with my friend Tim Arlen, which turned out, I thought, really great, because he works on an olive oil farm here in Ojai. And so we got to go out on the olive oil farm, and he told us all about what it takes to make olive oil. And we tried some of it, and we drank wine together, and he played a song. And, you know, so we got into the whole like lifestyle of what it's like to be a musician and doing other creative things.
I love that. Olive oil.
It's delicious too. He gave me a bunch of it. I use it every day now. It's changed my eating habits for the good.
So let's talk a little bit about Linda and LinkedIn Learning.
Sure.
How did you connect with that company?
After I'd written the few Pro Tools books and had started teaching and written the online courses for Berklee's online school about Pro Tools. And I got approached by Linda while I was still in Boston, teaching for the online school. And they said, hey, we want to do some Pro Tools classes. Do you want to do that? And so they flew me out. And this was when in the early days, where Bruce and Linda, the founders, would take every new author out to dinner and, you know, kind of wine and dine them and everything. And I remember they took me to this Greek restaurant down here in Ventura. And while we're having dinner, there's a what do you call it? A dancer. The dancers with the bare bellies?
Yeah, a belly dancer. Yeah.
And so I'm like sitting here with you know, trying to impress Bruce and Linda and this belly dancer, and she was just beautiful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Is this the test? And so apparently I passed. So whatever I did or did not do was right. So, but yeah, and then it turns out, you know, the CEO at the time, Eric Robison, was a huge music fan. And he was the one, and an amazing saxophone player. He played in the other founder of Microsoft's band, not Bill Gates, but Paul Allen.
Yeah.
He played in Paul Allen's band. And so the music segment was like his baby. And so I kind of came in and, you know, did a few courses with them, and then finally moved out here. And they started to want to build out the audio and music area. So after a few iterations of a few people coming in, I was like, hey, why don't I do this? And Eric said yes. And so I became the content manager for that area.
And then it's since expanded.
Well, yeah, we grew the area. We had you come in and do some classes, which was awesome. Particularly the ART course, the audio recording techniques course, is still one of the best ones. I think it was the most expensive course we have ever made at Lynda and LinkedIn combined.
You made your money back though.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, it's beautiful, and it's still obviously kicking in the library there. So if anybody is out there wants to check this course out, I mean, just pop in there and see. It's beautiful. Like we killed it on that course. You killed it. But yeah, Lynda grew. In 2015, we got bought by LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn got bought by Microsoft. So I'm technically working for Microsoft at this job right now. And I've since moved on. Audio and music has become a little smaller. And so I since have moved over to video and motion graphics, animation, illustration, but I'm still a musician.
Once a player, always a player. Can't get rid of that.
Well, I can't help it. I mean, it's just, with running the label, and I mean, I'm actually, I'm almost done with my own first ever solo album now. So I'm over the moon about that, and just ready to just make more music.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, you're in the right place to do it up there. You're not going to have a lot of distractions.
No. And, we figured out, I don't know what your time is, but I figured out an interesting way. You probably know a bunch of different ways of doing this, but like of recording, we did vocal tracks with my producers down in Atlanta, but we figured out this really cool way of doing remote sessions that works like a charm. And I'm sure we're going to be doing this for probably the rest of my life, doing it like this. Hopefully we'll be able to be in person, but like when we can't, this totally does the trick.
Were you using source elements?
Nope. What we were doing was, so the simple part was we would set up our phones would be a video chat. So I'd be standing in front of the mic and I'd put my phone. I've been to his studio. His name is Will Robertson. He runs Gallup Studios down in Atlanta. One of my best friends from Berklee days. I get to work whenever I can work with him. I do, and he's actually up for a Grammy this year, which is awesome.
Excellent.
So I put the phone where he would be, like looking through the window. So it's like I'm looking at him in the studio, and then I give him control over my Pro Tools session via Google Chrome extension, remote desktop. So he runs Pro Tools from his computer, but it's my Pro Tools. He's running my computer. So we don't have to deal with any latency, except the latency that he might see in the video versus the audio. And then we use this plugin called Listen To that you put on the master fader, and that shoots him an audio signal of the whole mix. And that's it. This situation works well for tracking one person, and there's no latency because he doesn't hear anything different, and he's just hearing the full mix. So, if there's a little latency between the video and the audio, it doesn't really matter. He's probably not even looking at me while I'm singing anyway. So, but I'll definitely look into that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
This is a $10 solution, so I don't know.
Well, Source Connect has a free version, but it goes up from there. It can get very intense, but you get what you pay for. So, but there's a lot of different tiers of the service. All right, last question. What's the best piece of business advice that you received or you learned along the way?
Oh, you saved the hardest one for last. Business advice. One of the things that I don't know where this falls, but one of the big things that I've been dealing with or getting into or trying to figure out lately is quieting the negative voice in my head. so having self-compassion, because I think that has been one of the biggest detractors for my business and myself and my sanity and my musicianship and basically about everything. I am very hard on myself, and I know a lot of people are. The inner dialogue is often pretty negative. And so I think correcting that or working on that, first acknowledging it, noticing when it's happening, and then using some techniques to kind of quiet that, I think are going to pay huge dividends in the long run. They already are. And I think that it helps potentially attract positive energy to you. I've noticed that in the past year. I've been able to attract some really amazing people to work with me that I'm still kind of in shock that they're want to contribute and be part of it. And I attribute that to sort of this self-compassion and outward compassion and using that energy, because people want to work with the people that they like to work with. And so if you can bring that energy, and it starts with the inside. If you're feeling negative on the inside, you're going to project it out. And so I'm working on that constantly now.
You can find out more about David at davidfranz.com. That's David Franz, F-R-A-N-Z, all one word, davidfranz.com, and his label Underground Sun at undergroundsun, all one word, .com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to the episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyowinnercircle.com, or you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyowinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.